Greetings. This presentation, you see the title on the screen, is about how we can use archaeology to help us reconstruct what trading relationships people might have had 200 years ago when there wasn't anybody, making maps of it and recording it and things like that. It's also useful just to teach some basic geography in a more interesting way. Story is very simple. In 1915, a farmer named Carl Schrumpf was trying to get rid of a big old tree stump out in his field. It was getting in the way. And when he dug this tree stump up, he found some arrowheads and other artifacts under the roots. And he immediately told the people at the university about this. He thought they must be really old because they must have been there before the tree started growing, and it was a big old tree. They were close to some bones, so he thought they might be an old cemetery. And we can learn a lot about the people in an area by looking at old gravestones and things that people put near their burying places. So then they contacted the local native tribes to find out what they would like to do it. And together, they started doing a kind of a planned excavation of university and native people. And they found some thin tubes that were made out of copper. Now, this is the first step in our story here. What do you think these are? And how might people use them? And you'd have to go to another primary document, in this case, an old drawing that showed that people that lived in this area used to put copper tubes in their hair. It was a kind of an ornament. It's like we wear earrings nowadays. So the scientists and the tribal members figured this must be a burying place for the indigenous people that lived here long ago. And as we explore more, you're going to take this map to record some information. So start by writing an S near the west edge of the lower peninsula of Michigan, like right there. What does that mean? Schrumpf Stump. Try to say that 5 times real fast. The copper for the tubes, though, you couldn't find it anywhere near there. It came from the Keweenaw Peninsula, which is way up in northern Michigan. So write a K on the Keweenaw Peninsula. It's that little finger of land that's sticking up into Lake Superior from the Upper Peninsula, right there. So now your map ought to look something like this. And what you want to do now is figure out how are people who traveled in canoes back then, for a very simple reason. A canoe can carry nearly 10 times as much weight as a person walking. How would you get from a canoe from the Keweenaw Peninsula down to Schrumpf Stump? And if you drew a line that looked something like that, you're probably about right. So that's the first line. And you could ask questions for your students, make a math lesson out of it about how far is that? And you'd use the scale of miles and say it's about 400 miles. Under the stump, they found a whole bunch of arrowheads, more than 1,000, and knives made out of flint, which is a really hard rock with very sharp edges. But there's no flint to be found in that part of Michigan. In fact, good flint comes from the southern tip of Illinois. So look for Illinois on the map and write an F down on the southern tip of it. And if you've got it about there, that's about right. The next question, of course, is how are you going to get there with the canoe? Well, the flint comes right next to the Mississippi River, and this river flows the border between a whole lot of states, from Minnesota all the way down to Louisiana. And Louisiana is easy to find. It's shaped like a great big boot. So draw the Mississippi River on your map, then click on this PowerPoint in order to see where it goes. And if you drew a line that looked something like that, you've got it. And people could take a canoe on the Mississippi River and then up the Illinois River and onto Lake Michigan, and they could get that flint up to Schrumpf Stump. A huge city called Chicago got built exactly where people would carry canoes from the Illinois River over to Lake Michigan. And it started already in the French fur trade era, and it became an important city, especially when railroads came along because they had to go around the lake. And those two routes would cross then right there. Now, the people that were digging underneath the stump found a whole lot of beads and earrings that were made out of seashells from the beaches of the Gulf of Mexico, in Texas and Louisiana. So draw some seashells or write some S's along the shores of Texas and Louisiana. And if your map looks like that now, the question is pretty simple. How do you get a canoe from Texas up to Farmer Shrub Stump? And you draw a line that looks something like that. They also found some stone pipes for smoking tobacco. And pipestone comes from just one place in southwestern Minnesota. So find southwestern Minnesota, put a P down there for pipestone, and then you got to figure out how to get the pipestone on your canoe. You could either take the Minnesota River, which goes right by the pipestone quarries, or you could take the Big Sioux River, which goes south and joins the Missouri River. So you've got two different ways that you could take a canoe over to Schrumpf Stump from Pipestone. And one of the other things that they found there were some buffalo robes. And people used to use these to carry things. They would make a bag out of a buffalo skin to carry nuts and seeds, or arrowheads, or pipestone, anything that you wanted to move around. This bag looks all worn and torn. It's not surprising. It's been buried there for over 1,000 years. It's the first thing that we were able to date with radiocarbon. And we know that buffalo used to live in Michigan, but they probably were all killed off by that time. So the hair might have come from Kansas or Nebraska or South Dakota. Let's write a buffalo out there somewhere. And we'll add a couple more rivers like the Platte and the Kansas River, and that gives us a nice little canoe route that we can get there. Now, one last thing. We're going to have to get some digging stones. And the best digging stones at that time, and some stones that were found in Schrumpf Stump, come from southern Ohio. So now we're going to put digging stones over here and another canoe route on the Ohio River. So your map ought to look something like this right now. And you've learned the locations and the names of about 5 rivers in about 6 states already. My question for you is, where would be a good place to put a trading post where people could trade all of these goods from all of these different locations? Would you put a trading post in Minnesota, Nebraska, Illinois, Kentucky? Where would be the best place for a trading post? And if you decided you were going to put in Western Illinois, you did the same thing that the indigenous people did over 1,000 years ago when they built a trading city near Cahokia, the Mississippi River. Now, we know Cahokia now because there's a mound there. This is an artificial hill that's almost as big as the pyramids in Egypt. But they'd have to build it out of mud because they didn't have any good stone. And they didn't have a desert to run through. It was all covered by forest. But that's a pretty big thing. I mean, there's a person standing next to it. Can you explain now, in a paragraph, why Cahokia became one of the most important trading centers in all of North America? And this was where all of these things were brought together. And then some of them were taken up the river to Chicago and then over to Schrumpf Stump, where we got all of the information that helped us put this map together. Oh, if you want one more math lesson here, who had to travel the farthest in order to get to Cahokia? And you can use the scale of mile downs at the bottom to figure that out. So what did we learn from Schrumpf Stump? That the indigenous people in North America traveled pretty long distances to trade things with each other. That important trade goods were brought from Michigan, Ohio, Minnesota, Illinois, Texas, even from Arizona, where turquoise came from. And we know that they were sending it both ways because Michigan copper found its way all the way out into Texas. They were trading long before any explorers, missionaries, or fur traders anybody came from Europe. And by doing this, we also learned or reviewed where some states and important rivers are located. So this presentation, a bunch of work maps, teacher notes, and supporting activities can come from this website. You ought to go check it out. Thank you.